The presenting sponsor of Food Safety Matters is Michigan State University. Earn a Master's of Science in Food Safety from Michigan State University. Flexible online courses allow students to balance their studies with professional life, no matter where they are in the world. Learn from a faculty of experts, build meaningful connections, and engage in enriching peer-to-peer learning. Imagine the pride and accomplishment of completing a master's degree while contributing to the safety and security of the global food supply. Visit foodsafety.msu.edu and then click on the master's program link to learn more. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Food Safety Matters, the podcast for food safety professionals. I'm Stacey Atchison, publisher of Food Safety Magazine, and I'm here along with my co-host, Adrian Bloom, our editorial director, and Bob Ferguson, president of Strategic Consulting. Well, I don't know about you all, or y'all. Y'all. Yeah, I'm going for the y'all lately. But this year seems to be moving really, really fast. And there's just a lot going on everywhere. Do you like how I did that, Bob?
I did. I liked that. I was looking forward to it.
Bob saw it in the script. He wasn't sure how it was going. Everywhere. And everywhere that I look in my little personal part of the world, I see some like unfinished to-do list item or to want to do item or something. But it's a lot, and I know I'm not alone. So all the more reason that I just want to take a moment at the top of the show today to thank everyone for listening. Thank you for taking some time, first of all, for yourself, and then for choosing to spend that time with us. Time is tight, and even in the podcast space, you have more choices than ever before. So thank you for choosing us and for trusting us to be a good use of your time. We appreciate you. And that's my sneaky way, actually, of taking a slow in-breath and out-breath with you. Okay, now we've arrived. Adrian, do you want to start us off by sharing a little bit about today's guest interview?
Yeah, so today I'm speaking with Dr. David Dyjack of the National Environmental Health Association, or NEHA, about the challenges and opportunities that are faced by today's food safety workforce, as well as NEHA's projections for the future of this workforce. And I think Dr. Dyjack shares some really interesting insights into how the food safety workforce may evolve. So don't miss out on this interview.
All right, so we're just going to get right to it. Adrian, let's break into the news.
Yeah, so first up in news today, you're probably aware of the government shutdown that began on October 1st.
Wait a minute. There's a government shutdown happening?
There is. And this shutdown...
I saw something about that somewhere.
I don't know. I think I heard something.
So the shutdown, which was forced by partisan disagreement on the government spending bill, primarily over healthcare insurance premiums, is expected to have significant implications for federal food safety work. So wide-ranging furloughs have been implemented at FDA, some of which could become permanent terminations. At an October 1st White House press briefing, Vice President J.D. Vance said the administration will, quote, have to lay off some people if the shutdown continues. Now, according to a Department of Health and Human Services fiscal year 2026 contingency plan, 41% of the HHS workforce, totaling 32,460 employees, are set to be furloughed during the shutdown. So updates to the FDA's core outbreak investigation table were originally set to be suspended during the shutdown, but on October 3rd, FDA issued a statement saying that it will continue to regularly update the core investigation table. FDA also said it'll continue detecting and responding to public health emergencies, managing recalls, mitigating drug shortages, responding to foodborne illness outbreaks, and conducting surveillance of adverse events. FDA will also continue to issue public health advisories to protect consumers from foodborne illness.
Well, I guess the first thing that is about the threat, I think that, or, the statement that they might be made permanent, I guess is really kind of more of a threat. We don't know if that's going to happen or if it does happen, if it's legal. But, a lot of things are being challenged these days. So,
I have a friend who's French, and he told me a saying a long time ago, which I think probably sounds better than French, but I'm not going to try that. It's the saying.
Oh, I
is
want to
essentially-
hear it.
yeah. The saying is essentially cry after you've been hurt. So I think there's a lot of threats. There's a lot of things going back and forth on this. But what I'm trying to focus on with the outbreak at the time of this being a little bit over a week is what actually has been going on, or what's really going on. For one thing, we know from a food safety standpoint that the USDA FSIS inspectors are still working. My assumption is if they didn't, the plants couldn't operate. So that's good that oversight is still there and the plants are still operating. From an FDA standpoint, the FDA inspectors may not be able to get to as many places. They'll still be doing outbreak investigations. We've seen in one of the outbreak investigations we're going to talk that they're still making updates to that. So we know that work, at least at some volume, is still occurring. The other thing that we know is the FDA does an awful lot of their inspections through the states, which at least in the short term won't be affected by this. The longer this goes on, there's going to be more casualties and more things that happen and stuff. But at this point, the state inspections continue to go on. The other thing I'll mention is that the plants, the food companies, also have their GFSI certifications or whatever certifications that they have. So as far as things like SQF or ISO 22000, BRC, whatever they happen to hold, a lot of the big buyers, the McDonald's, the Walmarts of the world, also have their own schemes that they use, that they have inspections for. So it's not as if the food plants are just on their own where nobody's looking in. And we also know, both from FDA data, but also from insight surveys that we do, that most plants will see an FDA inspector maybe every 2 years. Some people see it one, some people see it as long as 3. Even if this shutdown were to continue for a while, from an FDA inspection standpoint, a lot of that won't change. Again, the longer it goes on, there'll be more problems. But at this point, we really haven't seen those yet. So right now, hopefully a lot of this stuff that you're hearing is bluster. I would hate to see those furloughed workers become permanent. I have a lot of people I know that I work with at SIFSAN in College Park, and I know that they're also working. So again, there's a lot of things going on, but as far as what's happening with food safety, most of it is still occurring the normal way that it has been occurring.
Well, we're going to be talking a lot about outbreaks in this episode because there is a lot going on that front. So this is where, that public health piece for people to be aware, right, where there may be some threats and stuff. So it's good to know that all that work is still being done.
Right. And also that we'll keep up with that. So if we do find going forward, we'll keep up with that on exactly what's happening, what's being affected.
Yeah. We'll do our best.
Well, we have our ways. We'll find out.
We do.
Yeah. So we will definitely keep you updated on everything going on with this. So next up, we also want to tell you about a deadly Listeria monocytogenes outbreak that has been linked to ready-to-heat pasta meals made by Fresh Realm and California Ranch Food Company for HelloFresh. The recall has expanded to 15 states with 20 illnesses, resulting in 19 hospitalizations and 4 deaths. The pasta meals, which were made with a contaminated ingredient supplied by Nate's Fine Foods, have been sold under various brand names at major retailers including Walmart, Kroger, and Trader Joe's. The outbreak is being jointly investigated by FDA, USDA, and CDC, and third-party laboratory testing has confirmed that the outbreak has been ongoing for several months. On June 17th, Fresh Realm announced a voluntary recall of prepared chicken fettuccine Alfredo products sold under the Market Side and Home Chef brand names after routine USDA product sampling detected a strain of Listeria monocytogenes that matched clinical isolates from people who became sick as early as August of 2024. At the time, there were 17 illnesses and 3 deaths associated with the outbreak spanning 13 states. Also, one of the pregnancy-associated illnesses resulted in a fetal loss. So Fresh Realm began testing individual ingredients used to produce its market-side linguine with beef meatballs and marinara sauce meal next, and the linguine pasta samples were confirmed to be positive for Listeria. On September 27th, Fresh Realm notified FDA that whole genome sequencing had confirmed the linguine sample to be positive for the same Listeria strain that was detected in the recalled chicken Alfredo meals. Nate's Fine Foods, which doesn't sell direct to retail, began recalling lots of pre-cooked pasta after the testing showed the Listeria-positive linguine samples. The WGS results are pending to determine if the strain detected in the Nate's pasta is the same strain making people sick, and the company is working with its customers and with FDA to determine if additional recalls are needed. Then FSIS also announced on October 6th that Fresh Realm had notified the agency that the spinach, which is an FDA-regulated product, used in products distributed by HelloFresh, also tested positive for Listeria, specifically in containers of HelloFresh ready-made meals, cheesy pulled pork pepper pasta, and unstuffed peppers with ground turkey. No reports of adverse reactions due to consumption of these meals have been confirmed, but FSIS also expects additional affected products to be identified. And at this point, I believe the list of recalled products with this pasta and also with some spinach items is quite large and spans a number of retailers. I know that's all updated on the FDA's site about the outbreak as well. So check that site for ongoing updates.
And with these being ready to heat, I would imagine that they're probably they're out of date at this point, right?
Yeah, I believe I looked at the list earlier, and I believe almost everything is out of date. I guess there's some worry that consumers could be freezing them.
Freezing it,
right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Even meals that are no longer are past their fresh date, they are still obviously acknowledging that these meals have tested positive for or the ingredients have tested positive in these meals, so that people can, if they do have them in their freezers or elsewhere, maybe still sitting in their fridge, they can throw them away.
Well, and then to have like two really distinct ingredients, pasta and then spinach also wind up in the same stuff. It's like, wow, okay, you're having a bad day when two of your ingredient supplies are testing positive for Listeria.
Yeah, when I read through this, other than saying we could let the podcast go on for 3 hours, we could talk about this for 3 hours just because of the details and finding out more of what's going on here. But the thing that jumps out at me is how did this go on so long, particularly with Listeria and what I'm going to call a ready to heat or ready to prepare meal. They're just refrigerated. They're in the grocery counter there. But how does something like that go on that long? And what's their environmental program? What's their ingredient testing program? So there's a lot of those questions that I'd be really curious that without digging into all the USDA reports, you're not going to know. But I will say one. Go ahead, Stacey.
No, I was just going to say, I want to be clear, Adrian. I think you had said that this was actually these are delivery meals and not necessarily sold in stores, or are they both?
Well, no. So the pasta that is implicated that is provided by Nate's Fine Foods, that goes into a bunch of different types of these refrigerated kind of ready to heat meals. So it's not only HelloFresh, which is like, a delivery option, but it's other meals that are made under brands from different retailers. So it's both delivery and in-store retail. And it there's a spinach issue, but then the pasta, which was what has kicked this thing off, the investigation, is traced back to this one company. So clearly at that factory, there is a problem. The pasta maker. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, Bob. What?
No, that's fine. The other thing that Adrian said is they don't sell direct to retail, so there's not pasta sitting on the shelf somewhere. These are all going into commercial meals somewhere.
Yeah.
But the one thing that jumped out at me was when Adrian mentioned the clinical. Well, you said that the whole genome sequencing identified samples from ill patients in 2024. So those are clinical isolates going back to 2024. Those were not samples that were collected as a result of this investigation.
Right.
Those are ones that were found in the databases. So not only is this one complicated, but I'll go back to a point I probably make ad nauseum all the time, but this is one that probably wouldn't have been detected or would not have been even seen without whole genome sequencing and the databases. So I had to look this up just to show you, just to illustrate the scope of this. In 2018, just going back to pre-COVID days, the genome tracker had 160,000 isolates. So if you were going to look back in the past, if you did this in 2019 or 2018, you would have been able to look at 160,000 isolates of clinical samples. Today, the genome tracker has 1.6 million or 10 times as many isolates. So that just casts such a wide net. This is one of those things that in 2024, Had they not been collecting those isolates and leaving them in the database, never would have seen this.
Never seen the connection.
Never seen the connection or the match. That's right.
And so what we're talking about here then potentially is harborage, right?
Well, it is interesting. You had said something about looking at the ingredients, but there's also looking at the plant. So the ingredients may be coming in, and I don't know any of this, but the ingredients could be coming into that plant.
Oh, it could be at the plant where they're doing it, or at a supplier's plant.
Right, and they're finding samples matching the WHS sequences are matching those found at the plant. So again, you'd have to get into the details of exactly where those samples came from, but yeah.
Wow, but with that database, and I think this is your larger point, this gives us a great deal of insight into what the source and where the potential ongoing source of contamination is. So,
and even finding these out again, the genome tracker is clinical isolates of people that were ill. Most people don't seek treatment or need to seek treatment, so we really don't know the real scope of how many people get ill from these things. But with that database, we know a lot more than we ever did and can trace it back. And that's one of the amazing things that's happening right now.
Mm-hmm. And we also know that we had, pretty big gap on that for illnesses during COVID and stuff. I mean, that was not a priority.
People were less likely to go to a hospital.
Yeah, you're not going to go, right?
Right. That's right.
Yeah, so in other outbreak investigation news, the FDA recently introduced 2 new resources to help improve industry, government, and consumer access to information on foodborne illness outbreak investigations. The new resources include Executive Incident Summaries, or EISs, for closed investigations, and Foodborne Outbreak Overview of Data Reports, abbreviated Food Reports. So the EIS abstracts offer a high-level overview of completed outbreak investigations involving FDA-regulated human food products. The summaries include traceback, laboratory, and epidemiological data, and they are redacted per federal disclosure laws and FDA regulations to protect confidential information. These EIS abstracts are available on the core investigations table and a dedicated EIS landing page. As of the time of this recording, there are 4 EIS abstracts available, including an abstract for an outbreak that had previously not been communicated to the public. The abstracts include an April 2025 listeria outbreak with a suspected link to ready-to-eat deli sandwiches produced by Fresh and Ready Foods, an April 2025 salmonella outbreak linked to shell eggs sourced from August Egg Company, an April 2025 outbreak of E. coli 0145H28 with an unidentified source, and a May 2025 salmonella outbreak linked to cucumbers supplied by Bedner growers. So then the food reports provide analyses of recurring pathogen commodity pairs linked to foodborne illness outbreaks. The reports include historical data, laboratory findings, traceback results, and prevention activities. The initial reports that have been released summarize hepatitis A outbreaks associated with berries and salmonella outbreaks linked to tahini.
I have not seen these yet, but they look fascinating.
Bob's going to do a deep dive.
I will.
Indeed. I think as we all will, right?
Yeah, the reports contain a lot of really good data and summaries for folks to, and again, these are both issued after outbreaks are concluded. So, either they're closed or a source has been identified and the outbreak is over. FDA always announces when an outbreak is over, and at that point, that's when these abstracts and reports would come out. But I think it's really helpful to understand patterns and also just, take a look at historically what's happening with outbreaks in a given span of time and food commodity pathogen pairs.
And we're going to be getting into more of that information next, right? There's even more outbreak themes,
right? So
information.
This is kind of great segue into the next news story we want to share with you. Kind of continuing with the outbreak theme. So the CDC recently released a report that showed that fruit, vegetable row crops, and chicken caused the greatest number of multi-state foodborne illness outbreaks in 2023. So during that year, CDC investigated 84 multi-state disease outbreaks, 50 of which were solved. A suspected source was identified for 22 of the outbreaks, and a confirmed source was identified for 28 outbreaks. Of the 50 solved outbreaks, 32 were linked to contaminated food, resulting in 1,219 illnesses, 421 hospitalizations, and 9 deaths. The remaining 18 outbreaks were associated with animal contact. Fruit was the most frequently identified food vehicle of illness, causing 5 outbreaks, totaling 439 illnesses and 7 deaths. A single salmonellosis outbreak linked to cantaloupe accounted for 407 illnesses, 158 hospitalizations, and 6 deaths. Fruit was followed by vegetable row crops and chicken, causing 4 outbreaks each, with vegetable row crops causing 1 death. Other notable foodborne illness outbreaks that occurred during 2023 include listeriosis linked to enoki mushrooms imported from China, salmonellosis linked to bagged dry dog food, salmonellosis linked to fresh diced onions served at long-term care facilities, salmonellosis linked to both ground turkey meat and backyard poultry, and listeriosis linked to ready-to-eat caramel apples produced by the same manufacturer behind a 2017 listeriosis outbreak. So among the 32 multi-state foodborne illness outbreaks solved in 2023, the majority were caused by salmonella, with 16 outbreaks, followed by Listeria monocytogenes with 7, Shiga toxin-producing E. coli, or STEC, also 7 outbreaks, and Campylobacter with 2. Illnesses associated with Listeria were most severe, with 98% of patients being hospitalized and 4% dying. In contrast, 35% of patients with salmonella infections were hospitalized and less than 1% died. 52% of STEC cases required hospitalization, with no deaths, and 38% of patients with Campylobacter infections were hospitalized with no deaths.
This is, master of the obvious here, but what really stuck out to me just now, I read this over before we started recording, but as you were reading it, Adrienne, was the number of hospitalizations, right? And thinking really just as a person, when we think about this as, that event, like you are sick enough to take yourself to the hospital. That's pretty sick. For me, I know I've got to be pretty sick before I'm going to put myself through any of that. And what a disruption and potentially, expense and so on. I don't know. It just hit me as dramatic, but I also like that it was framed by the percentages, because I had been thinking about that, listening to all these different numbers, and I was like, percentages, and then getting to the end, there it was. It's very, very interesting information, even in a retrospective type treatment.
I can't get over the fact that the word listeria or listeriosis is quickly followed by ready to eat. Or ready to prepare. We in the last couple of stories we're just talking about that as far as those kind of products. So that's the one that always jumps out at me, is if those kind of products require that extra care.
Well, and nobody cooks their salad, right? Or fruit, mostly. That jumped out to me too. Obviously, we know that there have been many deadly, cantaloupe outbreaks and so on over the years, but that stands out to me too, because I tend to think of leafy greens and other vegetables before I think of fruit, which I don't know, maybe that's just a mental block for me.
Not
but
cooked, yeah. The other thing that really jumped out at me is Adrienne mentioned something about the caramel apples. I think she meant caramel apples. I don't know why she said it.
Tomato.
Wow.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so moving over to Europe, the UK...
I couldn't help that. I'm sorry. I couldn't help
right,
myself.
Bob. So moving over to Europe, the UK Food Standards Agency, or FSA, has completed a £24 million 4-year pathogen surveillance in agriculture, food, and the environment program, or PathSafe for short. This program was launched in 2021 to address foodborne pathogens and antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, in the UK's agri-food system. Led by FSA, the program, which was guided by a One Health approach, involved 8 cross-government partnerships, including with the UK Health Security Agency, the UK Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, the UK Animal and Plant Health Agency, Food Standards Scotland, the UK Environment Agency, the UK Veterinary Medicines Directorate, and the UK Department of Health and Social Care, and the UK Centre for Environment, Fisheries and Aquaculture Science.
In other words, everyone.
all the agencies. So foodborne pathogen sequencing data was generated from more than 12,500 isolates from over 8,300 samples. This data helped create new baselines, enhancing understanding of foodborne pathogens and AMR in different contexts, such as livestock and imported feed. Also, genomic data platforms for pathogens like Salmonella and E. coli were created through PathSafe and are now being trialed across UK government. These include one flagship platform and 25 tools and models. New surveillance methods were also developed under the program, including wastewater monitoring. These methods helped highlight the risks associated with hospital waste discharges and the spread of pathogens and AMR into the environment. More than 15 biosurveillance initiatives were also launched under PathSafe. So outputs from the PathSafe program have been cited in major UK strategies, including the UK Biological Security Strategy, the AMR National Action Plan 2024 to 2029, and the UK Veterinary Antimicrobial Resistance and Sales Surveillance Report. And building on the work of PathSafe, the UK FSA is developing a national food surveillance program to strengthen the UK's food safety and authenticity monitoring. This program focuses on increasing lab capacity, advancing testing methods, supporting cross-government collaboration, and using innovation and data to protect biosecurity. This program will include 4 work streams. First, enhancing the PathSafe genomic data platform functionality, developing attribution models to define the possible source of human infection, and investigating the use of AI to enhance biosurveillance capacities. Then second, analyzing routinely collected samples for the presence of STEC. Third, utilizing outputs from PathSafe and exploring the use of on-site diagnostics technologies at borders and/or abattoirs for pathogen surveillance. And fourth, expanding cross-government collaboration. So it sounds like a lot of things have come out of this PathSafe program, data and programs and tools. And so it's all good things for the future of food safety in the UK.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot in that story, but the one thing I'm going to point out, because I think this is one of the, I can't think of another word to say this, but it's one of the coolest things going on right now is this idea of wastewater monitoring. Mm-hmm. We had on Professor Ed Dudley from Penn State in Pod 191. And I'm getting a chance to work with him again because next week on the Washington, D.C. IAFP chapter, we're having a joint meeting with the Washington, D.C. chapter of the American Society for Microbiology. And we have a joint meeting, and he's going to speak at that meeting about this exact kind of wastewater monitoring that he does and has been able to find outbreaks, evidence of outbreaks that nobody reported and nobody even knew about. So all these ones that we don't know about are being detected in wastewater. The other thing is last year at that same meeting, and I'm not going to try to say the name again, but at the same meeting, we had another professor speak on a similar topic. But Adrian, you mentioned the idea of AMR because of hospital waste being dumped into the environment. The other thing you can use wastewater monitoring for is to detect antimicrobial resistance genes that are present in the bacteria that are in the wastewater and notify hospitals to look for these type of infections coming in that may be resistant to those kind of antimicrobial. So if somebody were to come in and say, oh, they have an infection, give them antibiotic X. No, we already know that there's one in the city that's resistant to antibiotic X. We need to do something else. And that's potentially life-saving for hospitals. So this kind of monitoring is casting even a wider net than what we talked about before about genome tracker, although that's what you'll go back and have all these isolates. But we'll be able to see all of the outbreaks that are completely invisible right now. So I think we're going to hear a lot about this in the next 2-3 years, that it's a really important surveillance technique.
Well, and these are huge investments, right? In the UK and I think, didn't we hear about this when it first started up, that they were going to be starting this database? And I think we reported on, I shouldn't be sitting here like wondering aloud on the podcast. All right, never mind.
Yeah, it's a huge investment though, £24 million, which I believe in US dollars would be almost $32 million. So, and obviously they've, been, the investment spans, a number of years that they've been working on this, but it's definitely a hefty investment in food safety.
And this is the UK, and I think that there's a similar program that's being, and databases being developed in Europe, right, in the EU. that we've reported on in the past. Yeah. So a lot of investments, and we will reap the rewards. They will reap the rewards. I'm sure we all will, because hopefully we're sharing this information too. So it's all good.
Yeah. Okay. So, and before we go today, we want to let you know about an updated directive from USDA FSIS that requires inspectors to augment their verification activities for major allergens to include gluten. The amended directive follows on the heels of the NEHA strategy released in September that noted concerns about gluten in product labeling. So this directive, titled Ongoing Verification of Product Formulation and Labeling Targeting the 9 Most Common, or Big 9, Food Allergens, requires inspectors to verify that establishments are accurately controlling and labeling the 9 most common food allergens and now gluten in establishments producing meat, poultry, and egg products. Now, although gluten isn't included as one of the big 9 major food allergens as defined by FDA, inspectors will now verify that establishments are accurately controlling and labeling gluten similar to the big 9 allergens. And also, FSIS is removing certain tree nuts that are no longer considered major food allergens, updating its milk category to include milk from other ruminant animals such as sheep and goat, and updating the eggs category to include eggs from other fowls such as duck or quail. These changes to tree nuts, milk, and eggs align with FDA's January 2025 updates to food allergen labeling requirements. FSIS is not changing any labeling requirements for milk and egg, but is just clarifying which types of milk and eggs are considered major allergens.
I guess I'm confused by it's a suggestion. It's required, but it's not really part of the law. I mean, I don't know how. I'm confused.
Okay, so we talked about this in the planning meeting, and I will confess to being surprised at how many USDA products are covered by this. Because again, I think the volume of USDA products are going to be meat, chicken, fish, those type of things, and eggs. I think that's their real purvey, and I think that most of those wouldn't really be covered by any of this. But in looking at the USDA covered products, you have a lot of breaded chicken, sausage with binders, sauces and gravies, all that go into some of these products, all of which can have gluten or certain gluten type products that this would be affected by. So if it's an ingredient, it has to be declared as an ingredient. And my other understanding of this is, if you're going to say something is gluten-free, it had better be gluten-free, because you have to have that truth in labeling. So I think that's where the USDA labeling requirements are not requiring it to say it is gluten-free unless it is. But if you're going to make that declaration, it has to be. But there's an awful lot of products that intentionally contain gluten, which have to be on the ingredients.
Okay. So it's kind of related to the allergen thing, but it's kind of just a labeling thing. Right. Because I remember there's a huge process, and I know there's supposed to be a before we go, Adrian. We were supposed to just say it, move along, but apparently I couldn't. It was in 2019 that they changed to the Big 9, and that was after the FASTER Act was approved and, made a law. So this is just, well, I guess it's a labeling law, and labeling is our laws, right? But in this instance, it's just a suggestion.
Well, this may be a bad analogy, but if you remember when we were talking about sesame being in hamburger buns and things like that, and some of the bun companies came out and said, listen, we can't guarantee that there's never a sesame seed in there because they're too small. So what we're going to do is intentionally add sesame and put it in the label.
Yeah.
And then that way we're covered, because we're not making a declaration that it's allergen free. We're just simply going to say it's in there. So yeah, there's sesame in here because we put it there. In this case, you would say, yes, there's gluten here because we put it there. I'm sure it's more complicated than that from a compliance standpoint, but I think that's roughly what they're saying.
But sesame was on the list as something that by law you had to, label for.
Right.
You had to declare. Right. So they're saying we're saying it's that, and we want you to do it, but it's not part of the law.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, this directive really is focused on inspection activities and telling inspectors you need to verify that companies are not only controlling and labeling for the big 9 allergens that are defined by FDA and USDA products, but also gluten now. So it's just kind of like a tag on. But this directive is really aimed at inspectors and what they need to do, which then, of course, dictates what companies are doing. So,
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. Well, thanks both of you for entertaining me on that one. And as always, there are links to all of the articles that we've referenced in the show notes. If you don't already, we invite you to follow us on our social channels, LinkedIn, X, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search for Food Safety Magazine. And to take a deeper dive into all the amazing content that we have, visit our website, food-safety.com. And now it's time for Adrian's interview with Dr. David Dyjack, who has served as Executive Director and CEO of the National Environmental Health Association, or NEHA, since May of 2015. Dr. Dyjack's 30-year career includes expertise in environmental health, emergency preparedness and response, public health informatics, infectious disease, workforce development, governmental infrastructure, maternal and child health, health equity, and chronic disease. A board-certified industrial hygienist, Dyjack also has advanced degrees in public health with a doctorate from the University of Michigan and a master's degree from the University of Utah. And after a very quick break, we'll hear their discussion. Unlock a deeper understanding of the science behind food safety with a master's degree from Michigan State University. This 30-credit master's program is heavily based in the sciences, with opportunities to tailor electives towards interest or career aspirations. Whether driven by a personal goal for a graduate degree or a desire to ensure safe food, earning a master's in food safety empowers students with the knowledge and tools to tackle any challenge. Join this network of professionals who are leading the way and making a difference in food safety. Visit foodsafety.msu.edu to learn more.
So today's food industry workforce faces a multitude of challenges and opportunities. And here with me today is Dr. David Dyjack to share NEHA's projections for the future of the food safety workforce. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Dyjack.
Adrian, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you. And, I know we talked about this a little bit in our discussions leading up to this podcast, but we know that some shifts are foreseen in the food safety workforce. And you talked about how NEHA has a wealth of data on who will make up the future of the food safety workforce and what these professionals will need to support them in their roles. So first question for you, can you kind of paint a picture for our listeners of what this future workforce might look like and what their professional needs will encompass?
So thanks for opening up the discussion on the who versus the what. Normally folks like yourself are asking what questions, what can we expect? But really this profession, the public health profession, is about the who. And I think from a framing perspective, just the gender composition of the profession is changing dramatically. When I joined NEHA, I can't believe it's been 10 years. I've been with NEHA. One of the quips that was introduced to me is that the profession, including food safety, was male, pale, and stale. And during my 10 years at NEHA, that has flipped upside down. If we look at who is in school at this time, looking at freshmen that are studying, let's say, the environmental health sciences and environmental health writ large, freshmen, so these are 18-year-olds, they're primarily women. According to the data I have from the Council on Education from Public Health, CEF-accredited schools have about 75% female as freshmen. As you move up into master's degree programs, that's probably like 2/3. And it's about 2/3 for doctoral programs as well. So as we look at who's actually in the pipeline, who has expressed an interest in working in, let's say, environmental health writ large, including food safety, and a lot of these people go to work in local government, working in environmental health and doing retail food is their primary bolus of their work. What we can anticipate is that the workforce is going to be dominated by women, and that movement is underway already. Anecdotally, when I go and speak at affiliate meetings, these are state meetings around the country, In most cases, it's mostly women. And you may say, well, that's interesting in the United States, but it's true all over the world. I'm privileged to travel and to Europe, to Australia, to New Zealand, and the profession is dominated by women everywhere I go. And so we're anticipating three-quarters of the workforce. And I say we, me, as I look at the data. And of course, there may be other ways, and we can talk about that, that people get into the food safety profession other than traditional environmental health degrees. But if this makes up an anchor place, like these students make up the anchor for the future, it's certainly going to be women dominated.
That's really interesting. And, so I mean, considering that we're seeing, a women dominated future workforce, and that the people who are going to make up that future workforce are now the younger generations, who are still in school or very earlier in their careers in some cases. How do you think that the learning preferences of this future workforce will shape current education and training initiatives for the sector?
So is your question what is, or is your question what should be? I mean, those are
I guess
two.
both would be good.
Okay. So
Yeah.
yeah. So let me share with you that, uh, listen, I'm towards the end of my career. I spent 18 years teaching. I mean, I'm pretty familiar with the environmental health profession, including food safety, and supporting that throughout my career. I'm becoming increasingly concerned about the preferences of the current generation. Now, I don't want to sound like some old, and I hope I can say this without getting into trouble. I don't want to sound like an old fart, but I believe the foundation for food safety is in the sciences and understanding biology and understanding chemistry and frankly understanding physics. And it is the intersection of all of those disciplines when they come together provide the foundation for the retail food and the manufactured food professional, food safety professional. And what I feel like, if you look at what's happening in Maryland and what's happening in Massachusetts, where the governor has come right out and said, we are going to open up all state jobs for people independent of whether or not they have a degree. Now, there's some exceptions for medical and clinical kinds of things, but I understand what the governors are doing. They're trying to make employment opportunities open to everybody. But I feel that puts food safety at risk because to be an effective person in food safety, I do believe you need to understand all of the sciences. You need to understand the context for which food safety exists. It's not just, can you take a 15-minute training and now you're an expert in X? And this is where we're headed, I think. This is what I'm observing. And you can call me an old man. I think I used the flatulent term earlier, but as as someone who's observing the workforce and have observed it for almost 40 years, I'm concerned that we're trying to titrate down to 10 and 15-minute videos, which is what the current workforce loves. Just in time, and I don't want to sound mean-spirited, but like the TikTok and Instagram era, just tell me what I need to know so I can do it. But this profession is so rich and so complicated and it's interdisciplinary. You have to understand what the rest of the professions around you are doing, all the processes around you, the engineering, in some cases, if you're in manufacturing, you have to understand how all of that works to be highly effective. And you can't do that if you just have a high school degree with no background in the sciences and you do a 30-minute video and all of a sudden you think you're an expert that you could go inspect a retail food facility or a manufactured food facility. Now, take what I'm saying with a little bit of hyperbole, but I think you understand what I'm saying is in this post-literacy era, and we're in it. We are in it. I mean,
Yeah.
folks don't want to read anymore. They don't want to read books anymore. They don't want to read lengthy articles anymore. They don't want to take the time to do that. I understand the world has changed. But, my team around me is saying we can do videos. This is the way this current generation wants to learn. And I think that there's a real risk with that. I think we're having a natural experiment right now. We can talk about AI and its role in things, but this natural experiment is how little can we do to prepare somebody for the profession and get them into the workforce as quickly as possible because there's that much demand. I understand the drivers. I'm acutely sensitive to those. But what we're talking about, Adrian, is the stuff you put in your baby's mouth. Do, do we really want someone with a high school degree and a checklist who just had 30 minutes of training just in time to be out mediating that? I don't. I just became a grandfather. I don't want where my grandchild lives to be serviced by somebody who doesn't understand what's going on around them with the foundational sciences. And I admit I may be aging out, but you understand my perspective is to protect and promote the public's health.
Yeah, unfortunately, I agree with everything you're saying, and I mean, you pointed out that a comprehensive education in the sciences is really quite necessary to do these types of jobs. You can't become an effective or knowledgeable public health professional by watching TikTok videos. It's just not happening. And so I think that's an interesting and very salient point. But I guess I also had a quick follow-up question. So you talked about a few of those states who are opening up the criteria for public health professionals. And I guess I was also wondering, aside from trying to make, I guess, these jobs more accessible, could it be that there's a critical workforce shortage in that area in those states specifically? Would that be a motivator for what some of those states you mentioned are doing, or I'm not sure. I'm just wondering if you know.
So I don't know the whole country. It's gargantuan. Our country of 350 million people. I will say that there are jurisdictions, state and local, that would take what you just said and start ringing a cowbell because that is their set of circumstances. I've had people come to me from, let's say, Arizona, literally Arizona, and say, to sit for the registered environmental health specialist exam that most counties and cities and states require, you need a bachelor's degree. We can't even get anyone for an associate's degree to apply for our jobs. What do you recommend that we do? So I am acutely sensitive to those issues. But with the rise of AI and with the rise of training videos and the rise of smart glasses that can detect, violations of regulations, I think we are fast forwarding and we're not being thoughtful about it. I do believe there should be foundational training that is provided to anybody in the retail food business. And if there are jurisdictions that can't find or secure someone qualified, we got to talk about, I think, a third way, not just let's get them on and start doing inspections, but is there some type of onboarding process? For example, NEHA is looking at developing what I'll call a 101, if you're familiar with the term. It's like, welcome to the environmental health profession. Again, for people working in environmental health, the largest part of their job is retail food inspections. So when I say environmental health, that retail food is a really important part of that. But there's organizations, maybe our role is to create a 101, maybe 40-hour class that includes a retail food. It's like, here is a thoughtful approach to being onboarded into the profession, and understand that this is just first step in your journey.
Mm-hmm.
I have a doctoral degree in public health, and every day I learn something. Every conversation I have, Adrian, I learn something cool and interesting. And it's that perspective that I don't think you can get from a 30-minute video or a 1-hour video on how to do an inspection. It's the context under which we do this work. So I think as we hire people, to answer your question, I believe they need to be onboarded really carefully. And that is, let us provide you an orientation, but understand this is one step in a 100-mile journey. And we don't want to cut you loose on society thinking that you're a professional now, right? So that orientation part, I think, is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, also I think continuing education, there's something to be said for the importance of that, especially in public health and environmental health, right? So, I mean, it's one thing to get people who are well educated and who know their stuff, into the profession, into these jobs, but then keeping them also up to date is important as well.
So during this
Mhm.
era of climate change, and I mean, I'm riffing on your point because you've made a good one. In climate change now, it's not in the future we may see this thing. It's happening right now. And let me give you an example of what the workforce is going to have to encounter. There are parts of the world, uh, many are tourist destinations, where the engineering of manufacturing facilities and retail food outlets are designed for a different climate, which means there is no fixing them, that you have to tear them down and build them all right back up. The
Right.
refrigeration, the cooling,
Hmm.
the heat, everything is designed for cooler temperatures. An example of this is what happened up in the Northwest in Seattle a couple summers ago. You remember that heat blob that was over the Northwest? Grocery stores were throwing out, discarding entire showcases of milk because the cooling system was not designed for the type of heat that Seattle King was
Hmm.
experiencing.
Wow.
That's what I'm talking about. And that's what your point was. Things are changing. Continuing professional education is important. And in my lifetime, it's more important today than it was 30 years ago. So I think that kudos to you. That's a really important point you made.
And, continuing on this theme of change, how do you see the shifting priorities at the FDA shaping the future of the food safety workforce and other federal agencies as well?
Well, that is about as complicated of a question that you could ask any human being. What is going to happen at the FDA or any of the other federal agencies that have a bite of the food safety apple? My reading of the tea leaves is that the FDA is more interested today in divesting itself of its responsibilities for inspection and handing those off to the states. In some cases, I think the states will embrace that and would want that responsibility and possibly administratively and financially ready for that. On the other hand, there may be other states that aren't ready for that. They don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the talent, they don't have the orientation to food safety. So I think the 800-pound gorilla in the room is that issue, and that's really interesting that you would mention that. Uh, I haven't seen a plan. I have not seen a plan. Like, here's how we're going to do it, and here's how FDA is saying, here's how we're going to do that, and here's how we're going to prepare those states to take on these new obligations. So it'll be for, I think, associations like NEHA to partner and collaborate with states one at a time, frankly, unless there are, compacts in the Northeast or the Northwest or elsewhere where states rally around together. And by the way, I don't know if you've seen the news in New England, they are talking about taking over what has historically been a federal supported public health enterprise and just doing it going on their own, like 7 or 8 states up in New England. And we may see that. We may see shared services in the future. That is 5 or 6 states. They have a limited pool of talent and they share that pool and then buy a prorated share, if you will, in terms of supporting the salaries and the benefits of those folks. But right now, everything is in motion, everything. So I think the key word, as I summarized our conference in Phoenix a few weeks ago, was uncertainty. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty in the field, and we'll have to see how things shake out. And certainly, we at NEHA want to do our part in contributing to uh, the next stages of the country's public health development.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, well, we certainly have seen a lot of upheaval and instability at agencies like FDA and CDC, and that will certainly have a big effect on the, I think, efficiency and efficacy of people in this country who are charged with protecting food safety and public health. So, we can only hope that things will sort out and get
Well,
a little bit
I
better.
hope so. I think, there's a lot of layers to the questions that you're asking. One of the layers, whether you intended it to or not, is the current uncertainty scaring people away from getting into food safety as a profession because they don't perceive it to be a stable kind of environment. From the government side, maybe the private sector is perceived is oddly enough, it used to be the other way around, right? Government was stable and you would never know, depending on business conditions, whether or not you would have a job in the private sector. Now that's flipped on its head, kind of like the gender composition of the workforce is flipped on its head. This is flipping on its head as well. And that's a real concern to me that folks that might otherwise be committed to service on behalf of the US population by working for local government or state government, maybe asking themselves, is this a good idea given the vagaries and the uncertainties of what's happening in the Fed today?
Yeah, those are really good points. And, you know, kind of, leading into my next question, you said you mentioned the private sector. So what would you say is industry's role in attracting and educating the future food safety workforce? And, how does NEHA work with industry to help realize these goals?
So those are two important questions. The first one is we have a business and industry affiliate, and we are often asking them, what do you need? Are you seeing the same things that we're seeing? What are you worried about? How can we collaborate? Uh, we haven't achieved a place where we're making a lot of really great progress, to be honest with you, but the conversations are certainly happening. At our annual meeting in July in Phoenix, the number two, Cesar Pena, number two person at McDonald's, was our opening keynote speaker. And so we're trying to socialize and normalize business and government. If that, I don't work for government, but I represent it quite often, trying to normalize the conversation between the two to benefit health and safety of the U.S. dining public. So we see ourselves as a broker or a catalyst to ensure those conversations and the phone lines are open and that we're making real progress there with that. NEHA also works with like Procter and Gamble and Micro Essential Labs, where we collaborate with them on training of the existing workforce. Procter and Gamble and Micro Essential Labs have expertise and technologies that we don't at NEHA, and we see our role is trying to bring that to the government sector so that they understand what private industry is thinking and how best to use the emerging technology. So I hope you see that. So NEHA's role is brokering and a catalyst and a collaborator between the professions. And that's where the action is, right? The private sector and the public sector. Industry, I think, could do a much better job, in my estimation, at offering internships because it reduces the mystery of working for the private sector. And I worked for a Fortune 2 company. I wasn't sure if I wanted to like be employed with them after I got my master's degree, and it removed all the mystery from them. And I got a job offer. Can you believe it? At the end of my summer internship. And I think industry really benefits if they offer a paid, let me say, paid internship. Individuals will be attracted to that, and then there could be that feeling out process. Do I want to work for this organization? And that organization can equally say, do we want to hire this person potentially? And if the answer is no on either side, then nothing ventured, nothing gained. The intern still got a good experience, and the company gained greater insight into, let's say, a product from a particular university. So internships, credentialing is something else that I think industry should be behind. We talked about maybe people without bachelor's degrees joining the profession. Well, one way to demonstrate that you're competent is through credentialing. And so I think that there's stepwise things that and very metered and very affordable things that industry could do to make a food safety profession much more knowable, if you will, to raise awareness about it, and to remove any of the mystery associated with working in that line of employment.
Yeah, those are great points, and certainly internships can be um, very illuminating for the folks that take them. But then also, if the company who is instructing that intern finds a good future worker, and somebody who's interested and enthusiastic and knowledgeable and skilled, then that's a win-win for everybody. Or, like you said, if it's a no on either side, then there was some knowledge gained there, so that's important as well. And yeah, credentialing very important as well. So thanks for mentioning those points. Now I wanted to,
So I want to
yeah,
interrupt you for just, if it's okay.
sure, yeah.
I don't want to be one of those guests that you can't get a word in edgewise. I used to run internship programs, and what I found was this: if we placed somebody in a geographic area that was perceived as being not ideal, let's say it was rural or frontier, or in a part of the country that maybe people don't historically like, what we found is by offering someone an internship, they got there and they're like, hey, this isn't so bad after all.
I
And
see.
so employers can, if they're sophisticated, they could use that approach if they're having trouble recruiting in a certain part of the country. Remove the mystery by having your interns there. And sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, I just wanted to share that there's real benefits to industry in collaborating with universities and getting interns into their system.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I did want to dive a little bit more into the work of NEHA, and I was wondering if you could share some background on the NEHA's Food Safety Committee and the work it does, and specifically how it's looking at helping addressing these food safety workforce training gaps and the challenges you're seeing on the horizon.
So what we're trying to do with our food safety committee is to identify those gaps and to make sure that we have the right tools and resources to fill that. So having private sector and public sector participants there in that food safety committee is really important to us, because they can assist us in identifying the kinds of things that the emerging workforce needs to identify. They're also, industry is much more nimble and agile than, let's say, traditional government, and they are often able to bring new approaches to training and education that perhaps those of us in, let's say, because academia is more systematic and traditional and methodical, where the private sector is really moving in a more fluid way. And so our committee brings those insights to us. Like, here's what's around the corner. Here's how you might consider training the next generation. Here's what we're seeing in the current generation. You all need to address that further upstream. And certainly, the digitizing of everything is something the committee weighs into. How in this digital era, what is the best approach? Because we've really just entered that era using AI and other techniques, and they're really helpful with that. But I would say primarily it's education and training is the fundamental area of emphasis for that committee.
Okay. And so I also know that NEHA offers several internationally recognized food safety courses and certificate programs. So I guess my question about those is who are those programs designed for, and what do they help learners achieve?
Well, if I could be so bold, I think not a lot, not all. So I don't want to get into hot water with you, but a lot of the world turns to NEHA as the gold standard for certain parts of the environmental health enterprise. The REHSRS, our
Hmm.
credential, is certainly
Yeah.
considered a gold standard for environmental health practice. We have a credential also known as the CPFS, the Certified Professional in Food Safety. Uh, Many of our corporate partners require that their staff get the CPFS, and many of those partners have uh, places of business outside of the United States. And then increasingly, with climate change, disaster preparedness, and emergency response is becoming everyone's responsibility. And the types of courses that we offer are amenable to people, no matter where they work, to be able to take advantage of those things. Something that we're doing next week, and this is early September, so I understand this show won't go on until the middle of October, but what we're doing in early September of 2025 is having a de-escalation training, Adrian. And that is useful for everybody anywhere. If you're in the public health enterprise, and there could be whether it's an inspection or whether you're auditing, which is becoming an increasingly lucrative, I think, part of retail food work or manufactured food work that people could get into. There's always conflict because of just the very nature of doing inspections. And we're offering a de-escalation training next week. At the last count, there were almost 2,000 people signed
Wow.
up for it. Okay, so this is a free webinar that we're doing in early September. And that's the kind of thing that we attract people from all over the world, literally all over the world. I want you to know, Adrian, our Journal of Environmental Health is now available in Spanish.
Hmm.
And
Oh,
it
that's
is
great.
this is the fastest growing part of our website visits is from Spanish-speaking countries, and more importantly, our entire website by the time this podcast airs will be available in Spanish. And the way that we have it designed is that if somebody's in Argentina, the technology will recognize their IP address and provide them the information in Spanish right away. They don't have to select Spanish. It will, but if you want to go back to English, you can. So what we're trying to do is to meet the learner where they are. And so as folks come to our website for information, for tools, and many of our tools, you don't have to be a member to get. There's some things that are locked behind the curtain, but we're really big on meeting the needs of people outside the US. Even though our primary audience is North America, we are doing everything we can to spread the gospel, if you will, of environmental health. And wherever we can provide something like our webinar on de-escalation, where we can provide it at no cost, we do that.
Hmm. That's a really interesting topic, the upcoming webinar on de-escalation. I can't say that I've seen teaching on that anywhere else. So that's very interesting. Will that webinar be available for people to watch after it is live or?
Absolutely. So it will be
Okay.
on NEHA, our NEHA YouTube station. What I would suggest in October of 2025, just go to NEHA, NEHA.org, and in the toolbar, search de-escalation webinar, and you'll be able to find it again free of charge. And we hope that the tools and resources from Miss Alicia Love, she is a food inspector in Montana, and this is her passion is de-escalation. And the reason she's involved in this is because of confrontations she's had in slaughterhouses and other places where, folks were upset over her
Hmm.
findings.
Hmm. Well, that's really interesting. And I'm glad you mentioned the information on how people will be able to access that webinar for viewing after it's, happened live, because certainly that's an important topic for people to look into if that's part of their job.
Right.
Now, you mentioned before, briefly, that NEHA also has some learning and education on disaster response, and that kind of leads me to my last question for you today. We know that increasing and more severe natural disasters have been brought on by climate change, and I think that proves a greater need for food safety and emergency preparedness by environmental health professionals. So this will also mean additional training amid, an already stretched and kind of shifting workforce. So I guess, how can these needs be met from your perspective?
Yeah, not easily. I think your point is well taken. The workforce is stretched like saran wrap, and it seems like we go from one crisis to another. If it's not a hurricane, it's a wildfire. It is Chagas disease in Los Angeles. It's screwworms coming up from Mexico into Texas. I mean, so every day is a challenge for public health workers. I think the trick here is getting back to where this whole thing started. As long as the workforce is fundamentally trained in the sciences and they understand the context for public health, if they have that background, then dropping a just-in-time training on temporary food establishments is a one heck of a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
Are you with me? So
Mm-hmm.
this is why I'm really big on fundamental conceptual training in the sciences, a little tiny bit of math, and let organizations like NEHA take it from there. I'm really afraid of overnight experts. That is, and I'm not against degrees in the arts or history, but take your time and learn the profession, understand its nuances and complexities before you want to become the CEO or before you want to become the president. Learn the skills. This profession is actually pretty complicated. When you think about it, it takes a couple of years to really get your feet underneath you, to get your land legs back after being out at sea. And let's not rush that workforce in. Number one, they'll burn out. They'll be
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
frustrated. Let's prepare them properly. And then I think there's much more likely to be success. What we don't want to have happen, Adrian, is for folks to feel like I'm out of here. We want to create a sustainable workforce. We want to create those career ladders. And you asked about private industry, and particularly in the private industry, we want to have those career ladders, and we want to make it okay, Adrian, for people to work in the private sector, spend some time in the government sector, then going back to the private sector. There's actually a lot of richness that I think is generated from that process. And, at least from the sidelines, I want to encourage industry and government to say, yeah, when we lose an employee, you just gain some useful insight. And I think that familiarity is really helpful over time.
Yeah, I think those are really great points. And, especially about making sure that workers are prepared to go and educated to go into these fields so that you don't have people burning out. You don't have people being frustrated every day of their jobs, which leads to these high turnover rates, right? And I think that especially the younger generations are, there's a lot of focus on mental health and wellness in the workplace, and they're very aware of how they feel in their jobs, how they feel when they're at work. And, so I think those are important considerations to keep in mind when we're looking at the future of the food safety workforce and welcoming these generations that, may still be in school or very early in their careers into the field, within a few years' time. So
this is why this orientation in the beginning is important. And I'm sorry if I'm animated about it, but it's critical. If someone is brought in with a checklist mentality, like a weights and measures mentality, or a code enforcement, even if it's within a company, a code enforcement approach, that is naturally conflict driven because you're potentially in conflict with somebody who's running that facility. Having a public health orientation is different. It's like, how do we solve a problem together? How do we protect the health, safety, and economic prosperity of everybody associated with this thing? And by having the proper orientation, the context I mentioned earlier, then there's much less likely to be conflict, and folks will enjoy their employment more. They're more likely to stay. And so I'm just not being an old man pontificating on the value of education. It really is important to have the right mentor, to have the right foundational skills, to have the right foundational education. It's critical to have long-term success.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Dyjack, I want to thank you for being with us on the podcast today to talk about, the shifts and the changes that you're seeing in the future of the food safety workforce, and, how we can prepare for that and how we can help accommodate the people that are going to be accommodate and educate the people that are going to be coming into the workforce. Really important topics because, we know that the students of today are our future, environmental health and public health professionals tomorrow. So thanks so much for this riveting discussion. I think this is really interesting for our listeners. So appreciate you being on the podcast.
And I appreciate the invitation. Thank you, Adrian.
Thanks again to Dr. David Dyjack for joining us on the podcast today. And once again, thank you all for listening. A very special thanks to our presenting sponsor, Michigan State University. To learn more about their master's degree in food safety, visit foodsafety.msu.edu and click on the master's program link. Now, you know, we love hearing from you. So please don't hesitate. Send us questions or suggestions to podcast@food-safety.com or post a note on LinkedIn, X, Facebook, or Instagram. We're always excited to get your feedback. And to make sure that new and bonus episodes magically appear in your podcast player, all you have to do is click that follow or subscribe button in the player of your choice, and presto, bingo, all the episodes appear. And while you're there, please throw some stars our way by rating the podcast, especially if you liked it. It only takes a moment, and it's good for everyone. And just like that, that's it for us today. Our next regular episode will post on October 28th. In the meantime, take good care of yourselves and those around you, and we'll talk to you then.